Come close to the fire, and let me tell you of a peasant's son who became the most brilliant soldier this land of ours ever raised. A man who, they say, never once lost a battle. 200 years ago, when Vietnam lay broken and betrayed, a great empire from the north poured across the border. 200,000 soldiers of King China come to swallow our land. They took the capital. They thought the war was won. And then, in the sacred days of the Lunar New Year, when no one makes war, one man came for them like a storm out of the south. In 5 days, he shattered them. In 5 days, he freed the capital and drove the greatest empire on earth back across the border in ruin. His name was Nguy letter 1EC5, Nhu letter 1EC7. History would call him Quang Trung. He was the lightning that saved a nation, and he was gone far too soon. Sit back and let me tell you the whole of it, how a barefoot boy from the hills became the storm that broke an empire. He was born in 1753 in the Central Highlands in a village called Tây Sơn, the Western Mountains. His family were not lords or nobles. They were common folk, traders and farmers. There were 3 brothers. The eldest, NH letter 1EA1C, was a shrewd trader who collected the Areca taxes. The youngest was L letter 1EF, and the middle one, fierce-eyed and brilliant, was HU letter 1EC7, the one our tale follows. They grew up strong and clever, trained in the martial arts, in a land simmering with anger. For Vietnam in those days was a country sick to its heart with corruption and misrule. You must understand how broken our land was. In name, there was still an emperor of the ancient Lear line, but he was a puppet, a shadow, holding no real power at all. In the north, the real power was a family of warlords, the TR letter 1ECB and H. In the south, another, the NGUY letter 1EC5 N lords. Between them, they had carved our one country in two and bled it white. And the common people, the farmers, the fishermen, the poor, groaned under crushing taxes, greedy officials, and endless want, while the lords feasted behind high walls. It was a land waiting for a spark. And in 1771, the 3 brothers of Tây Sơn lit it. They raised the banner of revolt, and they raised it with a promise the poor had longed to hear. Their cry was simple, and it was electric: seize the property of the rich and share it with the poor. To the downtrodden millions, it was like water in a drought. Farmers left their fields, fishermen left their nets, even bandits and merchants and mountain tribes flocked to the Tây Sơn banner. The rebellion swelled into an army and then into a flood. And at the heart of it, the middle brother NGUY letter 1EC5, NHU letter 1EC7 began to reveal what he truly was, not just a rebel, but a soldier of rare and terrible genius, quick, bold, and always 3 steps ahead. Year by year, the Tây Sơn grew stronger, and it was NGUY letter 1EC5, NHU letter 1EC7, again and again, who led the hardest fights and won the greatest victories. He turned first on the NGUY letter 1EC5 N lords of the south, who had ruled for 200 years. He stormed their strongholds and broke their armies until the old southern dynasty was all but wiped away. But one young prince of the fallen NGUY letter 1EC5 N escaped his grasp, a boy named NGUY letter 1EC5 N An, who fled into the marshes and swore revenge. Remember that name. He will return at the very end of our story. The desperate southern prince did a thing many would call treason. He begged a foreign king for help. And the king of Siam, sensing weakness, sent a great army and fleet to invade Vietnam from the south. 50,000 Siamese troops poured into the southern waterways in 1785, burning and looting as they came. It fell to NGUY letter 1EC5, NHU letter 1EC7 to stop them, and he chose his ground with a master's eye. On a stretch of the Mekong between 2 places called R letter 1EA1CH, G letter 1EA7M, and Zoi Mut, He hid his boats and his cannon and his men among the islands and the reeds, and he waited, and he lured the enemy in. When the whole Siamese fleet had sailed into the trap, he sprang it. Cannon roared from both banks. Fireboats swept down the current. In a single night, the great Siamese armada was annihilated. Of 50,000 invaders, only a few thousand crawled home. It was one of the greatest victories in all our history, and it announced to the world that NGUY letter 1EC5, NHU letter 1EC7 had no equal on a battlefield. Now HU letter 1EC7 turned his fierce gaze northward to the TR letter 1ECBNH warlords who had oppressed the North for generations. Under the banner of restoring the true Lair Emperor, he marched. He moved with the speed that would become his signature, faster than word of him could travel. The TR letter 1ECBNH armies crumbled before him, and he swept into the ancient capital, Thang Long. The mighty TR letter 1ECBNH, who had ruled the North for 2 centuries, fell in a matter of weeks. And HU letter 1EC7, keeping his word, restored the old Lair Emperor to a throne that had been powerless for lifetimes. To bind the peace, the old emperor gave HU letter 1EC7 a great honor, the hand of a princess of the royal house, the gentle and cultured NG letter 1ECDC Han, who would become the love of his life. But even as the Tây Sơn triumphed, a shadow fell between the brothers. The eldest, NH letter 1EA1C, had crowned himself emperor in the center and grew jealous of his brilliant younger brother's glory. For a time, it nearly came to war between them. In the end, they drew back from the brink and divided the land between them, NH letter 1EA1C taking the center, HU letter 1EC7 taking the north. So NGUY letter 1EC5, NHU letter 1EC7 now ruled the whole of the north from the ancient capital, the strongest man in Vietnam. But the puppet Lair Emperor he had restored proved weak, faithless, and afraid, and that fear would nearly doom the nation. For the restored Lair Emperor, a timid young man named Lair Chiaru Th letter 1ED1NG, could not bear to be a mere figurehead beside the towering NGUY letter 1EC5, NHU letter 1EC7. He wanted real power, and he was willing to sell his country for it. So he did the unthinkable. He sent a secret plea across the northern border to the mightiest empire on earth, the Qing dynasty of China, and begged them to send an army to crush the Tây Sơn and put him back in true power. On the dragon throne of China sat the great Qianlong Emperor, ruler of a quarter of humankind. He saw a chance to make Vietnam a vassal once more, and he seized it eagerly. In the winter of 1788, the Qing armies came. Not a raid, but an invasion. A host of some 200,000 soldiers poured across the border to swallow Vietnam whole. They were led by an arrogant general named Ton Sai Ngh letter 1ECB, who marched south almost unopposed, certain the little kingdom would kneel before the might of China. The Tây Sơn forces in the north were few, and wisely they did not throw themselves away. They gave up the capital and fell back south, sending urgent word to NGUY letter 1EC5, NHU letter 1EC7. The enemy is here. Come. And so the king took Thang Long, the ancient capital, without a real fight. The traitor Lair Chiaru Th letter 1ED1NG was set up as their puppet. General Ton Sai Ngh letter 1ECB settled his troops into the city to celebrate the coming New Year and thought the war as good as over. Word reached NGUY letter 1EC5, NHU letter 1EC7 in the south, and he did not hesitate. But first, he did something that turned a rebellion into a nation's stand. He climbed a sacred mountain, and he made himself emperor. He took the reign name Quang Trung, pure and loyal, and he declared to all the people that this was no mere clash of warlords. This was Vietnam against a foreign invader. This was for the homeland. And the people answered. As he marched north, The common folk flocked to him in their tens of thousands, for now it was not a lord they followed, but an emperor and a cause, their country's freedom. Now came the feat that men still marvel at. Quang Trung had to move a great army hundreds of miles north through the winter, and he had to do it faster than any army had ever moved. So he devised a way to march day and night without rest. He formed his men into teams of 3. At any time, 2 would carry the third in a hammock slung on a pole while he slept, and then they would swap. The army flowed north like a river that never paused, eating as it marched, sleeping as it marched. It covered the ground in days that should have taken weeks. Speed was his oldest weapon, and never sharper than now. And as he marched, he made his men a promise, a bold, almost impossible promise. "We will crush the king," he swore, "and we will feast in the freed capital by the 7th day of the new year. Remember that promise." Here was his masterstroke. He would strike during T-1EBFT, the Lunar New Year, the most sacred, most peaceful days in all our calendar, when no one, by all custom, ever makes war. The king generals had let their guard fall. They were feasting, drinking, celebrating the new year in the warmth of the occupied capital, certain no enemy would dare disturb the holy days. They were exactly wrong. On the eve of the new year, Quang Trung's army arrived before the enemy's outer forts, unseen and unsuspected. He gave his soldiers a hot meal and told them to celebrate T-1EBFT early, for tomorrow there would be only battle. And then, in the freezing dark of the first days of the new year, he unleashed his storm. His army fell upon the outer king forts one by one in the night, swift and silent and merciless, overrunning them before the alarm could spread to the capital ahead. Then came the great fortress of NG-1ECDCH-1ED3I, the strongest of them all, bristling with cannon and defenders, blocking the road to the capital. Against it, Quang Trung showed the full genius of a master of war. He had great shields woven of wet straw and earth, and behind each one a wall of soldiers advanced through the storm of king gunfire, unstoppable, right up to the walls. And before them thundered the war elephants, great beasts with cannon and archers on their backs, smashing the gates, trampling the lines, spreading terror through the king ranks. NG-1ECDCH-1ED3I fell in a morning of fire and fury. The great king army before the capital broke and shattered, and the survivors fled in blind panic toward the city. And at a place called Distro-1ED1NG Dar, another Vietnamese force fell upon the fleeing enemy and crushed them utterly. So many king's soldiers died there that they were buried in great mounds, which stand to this day. In the capital, the arrogant General Ton Sai NGH-1ECB heard the thunder coming and did not believe it, until the panic reached his own gates. Then he fled north in such terror that he abandoned his seal, his tents, his whole army. The traitor Lear Chieru TH-1ED1NG fled too, running north into China behind his broken masters, to live out his days in shameful exile, a king who had sold his country and lost it. So many of the fleeing king crowded onto a single bridge of boats across the Red River that it collapsed, and the river ran choked with the drowned. Of 200,000 invaders, a great host never went home, and Quang Trung kept his promise to the very day. On the 5th day of the new year, his banners rose over the freed capital, and his soldiers, his war robes still stained with powder smoke, celebrated T-1EBFT in a liberated Thang Long. There is a tender story they tell of that victory. In the freed capital, Quang Trung is said to have plucked a branch of pink peach blossom, the flower of the northern new year, and sent a swift rider south with it. It was a gift for his beloved NG-1ECDC Han, the princess far to the south, a single branch of blossom, to tell her without a word that the north was won, and the war was over, and he was coming home. The warrior who broke an empire was also a poet at heart, and for one shining moment, It seemed a golden age had dawned for Vietnam, a strong emperor, a united people, a homeland free. Now Quang Trung turned from war to building, and here his vision proved as bold as his generalship. He dreamed of a new and stronger Vietnam, remade from the roots. He championed our own Vietnamese writing, the chronicles nom, over foreign script, so that our people might learn in the language of their own hearts. He reformed the land, the taxes, the schools, the army. He even dreamed of demanding back from China the ancient lands of the South that had once been Vietnamese, planning, some say, to turn the tables and press the very empire that had just invaded him. He was not yet 40, at the height of his powers, with a nation reborn taking shape in his hands. And then, in 1792, with almost none of it finished, Quang Trung suddenly fell ill and died. He was gone in the blink of an eye, the lightning that had saved a nation, snuffed out at 40. And with him died the golden age that Vietnam had glimpsed for only a few short years. For without his genius to hold it, the house he built swiftly crumbled. His young son could not command the loyalty of hard men, and the Tây Sơn began to tear itself apart. And out of the southern marshes returned the one who had sworn revenge, Nguy Letawani 5 An, the prince who had escaped so long ago. Patient and relentless, he gathered his strength and struck at last. Within a decade of Quang Trung's death, Nguy Letawani 5 An conquered all of Vietnam, destroyed the Tây Sơn utterly, and founded the last dynasty of Vietnam. History is cruel to the sons of great men. But though his dynasty perished, Quang Trung himself never faded. For our people never forgot the peasant son who never lost a battle and who broke an empire of 200,000 in a single week. To this day, every Lunar New Year, we remember the burial mounds of Distro Cletawani D1NG Da, and the emperor who feasted in a freed capital with the smoke of battle still on his robes. He is one of the brightest names in all our history. He was the lightning, brilliant, blinding, and brief. And though the storm passed too soon, the land it lit up has never forgotten. Sleep now and dream of a homeland free. Rest well.